Hey everybody, this is Vitek from Metal Wani, and with us today we have David Ellefson. How are you, David?
Hey, I'm doing well, thanks. How are you?
I'm doing good. First of all, congratulations on your new book, My Life With Deth.
Thank you.
Could you please tell us a bit about the running thematic premise of the book and how long this endeavor of yours has been in the works?
Sure. I mean, it took about 3 years to write it. My co-writer, Joe MacGyver, had urged me to tell my life story when I came back to Megadeth back in 2010.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was when we started doing the interviews for it and laying out the manuscript. It's interesting because at the time I didn't think that there was enough there for a story.
Right.
But then as I got into it and I started talking about the things and Joel being well versed with the Megadeth history,
right.
and me as a bass player and all these things, he knew where to steer the book, to pull out the things of interest,
True.
So as I look back on it, to me it's a story of a kid who fell in love with rock and roll and fell in love with the bass guitar, and that bass has now taken me around the world many times and gotten to do a whole bunch of other things that, and I think probably coming from a small rural town, most people would look at, like, what are you, crazy, rock and roll, a bass, what are you, out of your mind? Yet I followed that, and that gave me an unbelievably cool life and a very different life. And sometimes I think maybe that's one of the bigger lessons, which is, follow your gut, follow your heart, because, those things call to you that are meant to take you to where you're supposed to go.
Absolutely right. How did you rope in a legend like Alice Cooper to furnish the foreword of the book, and why was he chosen in particular?
Well, I reached out to a handful of people. I wanted some of my friends, who have been on the journey with me, to make comments in the book. Not so much about me, but maybe about certain events and things that, they were part of. Like Kerry King, of course, played guitar in the earliest days of Megadeth for the first few shows. Alice Cooper took us on our first big arena tour when we first got signed to Capitol Records on the Peace Sells album. So there were significant people along the way, and Alice in particular, because of course he's been everywhere I've been and more, both in rock and roll and certainly in his recovery from alcohol, and he's also very open about his Christian faith. He talks openly about it, yet he goes on stage and he's this almighty cool heavy metal rock star. And
True.
So I thought for him, he's definitely someone who his journey is an admiration of mine, number
True.
one. And we also have, he's part of the Megadeth story too. So I thought that, with everything that I put in the book, I wanted to make sure that it was all part of the Megadeth story, because of course that's how people know me. They know me through that, and I thought it would be interesting for the reader to see how all these different things have been part of that, because I think sometimes the perception to the mainstream is, oh, you play heavy metal, you must be some drugged up loser. And I think sometimes even within the heavy metal business, it's like, dude, you're not cool if you have faith, and you're not cool if you do anything other than heavy metal. And that's why, both parties are to blame. The mainstream judges a book by its cover, and yet sometimes the heavy metal community, they give the mainstream a lot of ammunition to look down on us.
Absolutely
so
right.
I kind of felt like I've been placed in a unique position where maybe I can be a champion of goodwill for heavy metal, that we're not all drugged out losers. We just love rock and roll. We love our music. We love our metal. And also I have a foot over in the mainstream to say, hey man, you can still play metal and you don't have to hate the world while you do it too.
Absolutely right.
So I felt like I kind of can be a voice for both campuses.
True. So, safe to say that it's not a dirty rock and roll autobiography?
No, it isn't. And I guess that was probably my hesitation initially in writing it when Joel approached me about it, because I'm like, my debauchery stories are almost 25 years ago, some of those, because it was part of the journey. But, I'm not a guy, I didn't have some axe to grind, and, I didn't have to tell this story to sort of set records straight about, how, I needed some kind of vindication.
Mm-hmm.
Those things for me are things that need to be handled privately, not publicly,
True.
and I've worked through all those things years ago and that's part of, alcohol and drug recovery is getting down to those things and dealing with. So anyway, that those things weren't, in my opinion, the focus of the book. And it's funny, I'm looking in my bookshelf right now. I've got a handful of books sitting there from other rock and rollers,
Mm-hmm.
and some of them are fascinating reads because of those stories.
Right.
But that was not my life story. So I think the thing that is probably the interest in my book is the contrast. Here I play in this just killer, heavy metal band, Megadeth, yet I have a life both within Megadeth
And
and
outside
even on
Megadeth.
stage. Yeah, that's very, it really balances the whole thing out.
True.
And the truth of it is I have to do both. I mean, I couldn't just
Stick
not
to
be on
one.
the stage and sit at home and be Ward Cleaver. I mean, that doesn't
Mm-hmm.
work. Yet at the same time, to only be a guy just in a rock and roll band, I found that really limited my life. It put a cap on my abilities, and so I
Mm-hmm.
guess my journey is to be able to. My journey is one that has found that they all can work together.
Absolutely. Now, since you mentioned about Joel, to what extent did Joel contribute to the creative brainstorming of the book?
Yeah.
Did he help you convey your thoughts better than you would have if you had made this a purely autobiographical book?
Yeah, and I think it's just like producing a record.
Mm-hmm.
It's one thing to be the artist. I think it's very dangerous when the artist tries to self-produce. I think that perspective is needed, to have an outside person come in and help direct some of the creativity. And so that's how I look at Joel as a co-writer of this book with me, is that he was able to say, let's pull more of that out. That more of that story needs to be told.
Right.
And then he would say things like, you know what, I don't think we need to go there with that. Let's tone that down. And ultimately, he helped me get it on paper.
Mm-hmm.
And then once it was on paper, I looked at it, and then I was able to, then you go through a very critical phase, which is the editing, which
Right.
is I know from making records that it's sometimes what you don't put on the record helps the rest of it sound great.
True.
There comes this moment where you have to trim and cut and pull back, and it's so that the truly great things can stand out. And you see
Absolutely.
that obviously even in films and in movies. It's like you realize there's a lot more that was probably filmed, and the editing, can either make or break a piece of creative work.
True.
And so to me, the final editing, it was cool because it gave me that perspective to say,
Mm-hmm.
okay, there's a rock and roll story here, there's a Megadeth story, there's certainly the drug and alcohol story, there's a faith story. These all work, but I really wanted to make sure that it was a book that spoke to the Megadeth legacy as much as anything.
Right.
And I think that was probably top priority for me, because that's where people know me. They know me as the guy in Megadeth. And
Absolutely.
I particularly, everything I do, I always think about our fans,
Right.
and it's important to me that the things that I do are things that reflect well on the Megadeth name and the Megadeth legacy.
True, that's absolutely right. Now, since you mentioned the content was put on the paper, what part of the book was the hardest or more enjoyable than you thought it would be to write? I'm sure there must be, many emotionally compelling parts that were specifically hard to tackle.
I'd say probably talking about probably my transitions back in 2002 out of Megadeth. That was such a
Mm-hmm.
part of my life for me. And it as scary as it was to go through it, it turned out to be one of the best things that ever happened to me. And
That's nice.
And and I think even for Megadeth, because when we came back together, all of a sudden we felt this huge wind in our sails. That it's kind of like our time apart actually made both of us better. And I guess in hindsight, that's the cool part of it. And so it was fun to actually to talk about that period of my life, because it was a really explosive season of my life to grow as a man and as a family man, and it did. There's a lot of great stuff from it. Some of the other parts that were maybe a little uncomfortable to talk about were some of the days back, especially around like P-Cells and Killing Is My Business, when we were really poor, we were really broke. It's fun to look back on them now because we survived them, but to kind of relive those moments and tell the gory detail of what they really were. I mean, it was brutal back then, man. I mean, me and Dave were broke. I mean, we were literally homeless. I mean, we had no money. We had no place to really call home. We just sort of crashed at our friends' houses, and that's all part of a great rock and roll story now. But as we were going through it, man, it was brutal.
Whoa. Well, how does your book, compare to Dave's autobiography? Was it structured and conceptualized in a similar fashion, or will it be an altogether different take on life on Megadeth?
No, I look at it like his is from center stage and mine is from stage right.
That's awesome.
So it's kind of like we both were, for a big part of our life, certainly the Megadeth years, we were both, kind of starring in the same movie together.
True.
It's just that, we had different roles within that story. So it's kind of cool because he and I obviously know all the history of the very, very beginning of the group in those early days. So I think from a fan reading both me and Dave's books, you can really get a pretty full story of what was there. I'm sure a lot of the stories in both of our books probably reflect a similar setting, and so it's kind of cool. It's kind of cool that probably both of us tell the same story, just we each tell it through our own eyes, and hopefully again that kind of that sort of fills in the colors of the bigger story of Megadeth too.
Wow. Now, since we're talking about the earlier days of Megadeth, we all are aware that Megadeth had anti-religion themes in their past material. Now, you're part of a thrash metal band, and you're studying to become a Lutheran pastor now. Could you clear the air on these opposing ideological stances, please?
Sure. Well, the thing of it is here again, I think, when you're young and you're growing up, you're trying to find your identity. So it's like either you're with me or you're against me. It's an either or mindset,
True.
And I grew up going to church on Sunday. I mean, the church never did anything bad to me. My school teachers never did anything bad to me. My parents never did anything bad to me. I really didn't have much to rebel against, quite honestly, because I have a really good family and a really good upbringing. Conversely, I see a lot of people who get into rock and roll. Rock and roll is their escape, It's their F you to the world. It's I'll be somebody, just you watch. That's kind of the mindset of it. And for me, it was, mine was, I wasn't so much driven as I was led. And I think there's a big difference in the motive behind that. And it's the thing that gets me out of bed every morning still to this day, the same way I did when I was 11 years old, excited about music, excited about doing this interview. As you called me, I was practicing my bass. And
wow, you're practicing bass at this time. I think it's around 8:30 in the morning, isn't it?
Yes, yeah, it's like 8:30. Yeah, exactly, 8:30 in the morning. Yep. So I'm up early, and I'm listening to music at 8 a.m. Bass in hand by 8 a.m. and so I still have the same passion in it. And again, it's not because I have something to prove. It's because it's from what comes. It's what's within us reflects what comes out of us.
Absolutely right.
And so that to me is really more my story, and so that speaks to both music, and it speaks to a desire to grow, to make sure your spirit is happy and in line too, because I've stood on heavy metal stages, and when I'm spiritually aligned and really feeling correct in my
Mm-hmm.
walk, I'm a better bass player. I'm in the moment. I'm present. I'm not distracted by other things. I'm not thinking about what happened yesterday or what might happen tomorrow. I'm really in the moment. And to me, that's really what the spiritual walk does.
That's
Is it
great.
puts you in the moment, so you can really be at peace right now and enjoy what's happening right now.
Indeed.
So
Well, since we're talking about your bass playing, right from the bass intro of Peace Cells to the bass intro of Kingmaker, and those 8 years when you were away from Megadeth,
yeah.
how do you feel your bass playing has evolved from last 3 decades?
You know, it's when I met Dave.
Mm-hmm.
I grew up. I was into rock and roll and Kiss and BTO and Ted Nugent and all the things I heard around me. Those were my influences.
Mm-hmm.
Kiss probably more than anything. And then at one point I went. I started studying jazz bass players because I went to a jazz concert and I just saw the incredible musicianship.
Mm-hmm.
I should say Rush was certainly one of the early kind of progressive musical influences that really opened my eyes to, like, wow, there's other ways to play music and play this bass
Right.
that are very progressive, and it inspired me. So, and then
Mm-hmm.
I just got turned on to jazz, and I'm really not such a big jazz fan. I'm really not. But what I liked about it was the bass players were like just out of this world.
Right.
So it showed me that there's, as a bass player, I had to kind of leave the rock genre to just tap into some other sources of inspiration.
Mm-hmm.
And so I took all those things. So by the time I met Dave at 18 and we started Megadeth, all of a sudden now I had both rock and roll, I had jazz. Where I grew up, people were listening to country and western music, so I had a lot of different varieties of stuff
Wow.
to bring to the table. So as we started to form the Megadeth sound, and my bass playing, was a style of playing developed within Megadeth,
Mm-hmm.
I had some resources to draw from, and so that, of course, is what you hear on the early records. Then in the 90s, we sort of developed more into this song band rather than
Melodic
just
journeys.
riff. Yeah, exactly. And then, of course, the years that I was away from it, I think Dave really worked hard to try to recorrect the Megadeth sound to get
Mm-hmm.
it back to its origins of really being a progressive thrash kind of sound.
Right.
When I came back, first thing, of course, we did was Rest in Peace, which was great for me because my chop stayed up. I think probably
Mm-hmm.
the thing I did the most of in my time away from Megadeth is I played with a lot of different people.
Right.
I realized I'd been in one band for almost 20 years, and quite honestly, my chops were getting stale.
Mm-hmm.
I was running out of inspiration because when you only just play your own music, you just kind of get stuck in your own little bubble. And I'd say more than anything, those years away from Megadeth for me were about saying yes to a lot of things, getting out,
Mm-hmm.
playing cover songs with my buddies, playing in church, playing. I had this group F5, which was kind of more of a modern metal sound, different tunings of the guitars. The F5 guys are a few years younger than me, so they had a different. Their ear was tuned into different styles of music than what I had been listening to. So all these things really opened me up. So when I came back to Megadeth, I wasn't just a thrash metal bass player anymore. I had a much wider palette of sounds and styles I could draw upon. So and what I found is it made me a much better Megadeth bass player.
That's great.
So these last couple of records, I think, have been more about exploring that stuff, and really excited about back playing thrash metal again.
That's wonderful, David.
Thank you.
Now, since we're talking about Kiss, Megadeth recently opened for Kiss, Iron Maiden, and Black Sabbath. What was the experience like? These bands are all obviously influences on Megadeth's music. So, do you guys still have those initial inhibitions and moments of excitement regarding the prospects of meeting your idols, or is it more like a casual chat, with each other?
Yeah, I mean, like, for instance, we were just on tour summer with some friends, Zach Wild, who I got to know quite well on Gigantic. Vinnie Paul, who's been a longtime friend. seeing Jason Newsted again. And obviously I knew Jason when he was just, the kid in Flotsam and Jetsam. And then, of course, his experiences in Metallica have shaped him to become the player and the man that he is today.
Right.
So that was a lot of like kind of going back and revisiting friends. And that was almost like a high school reunion, like getting caught up. Then we were on tour with Iron Maiden, and Maiden was I was a big fan of Iron Maiden as a teenager, as I talked about in my book. And Steve Harris, not just him as a bass player, but as a songwriter, as a visionary, as a leader of his group, really was inspiring. And I actually for the first time, really got to spend some one-on-one time with Steve. And we didn't even talk about music, we just talked about health and diet and running and kind of stuff that's more akin to what guys our age would talk about. And it was just kind of cool. He's got family and kids, of course, and so do I. So as you get older, you have other things you can talk to people about rather than just, dude, I love your bass part in that song from the third album. And I think that kind of connects us as people. And then similarly, we were just down in South America with Black Sabbath this last month, and the same thing. In fact, it's funny because we're heading in this weekend to do this Bass Player Live, this Bass Player Magazine event where Geezer Butler's going to receive an Achievement Award. So it's nice to, I've gotten to know Geezer over the years, and just a really super cool guy, and all the Sabbaths are great, and just a good hang, and two bands were musically very different, yet, to me, Black Sabbath, a lot of people claim Led Zeppelin is their influence, and quite honestly, I miss Led Zeppelin. By the time I started getting into music, there were two records sitting on my record store shelf in the little town I grew up. There was Kiss Alive and Led Zeppelin Presence, and just based on the album cover, Kiss Alive flat out won that race.
Yeah, right.
So I turned into a Kiss fan rather than a Zeppelin fan, and as I went back, to me, Sabbath is, I was not such a big fan of blues music, which Zepp was more of a blues band.
True.
Sabbath was a riff band, and I loved riffs, It's a thing I loved about early Def Leppard, about UFO, about Thin Lizzy. It's, it's a thing I love about heavy metal music that I like, is riffs. And to me, probably Sabbath and Deep Purple, their music is defined by the riff, and riff with melody over it. And that's what turns me on. And so for me to be out with Sabbath this last month, it was cool because it's the earliest version of Sabbath,
right.
All the early tunes that pretty much by and large shape and defined what we call heavy metal today.
Absolutely right. Now, talking about Bill Ward, do you miss him on the latest Black Sabbath album?
I love hearing Bill on recordings, and again, I don't know the details of what happened there with that. I mean, certainly, lineup changes happen, things happen, bands, so I don't know the details of that. Yeah, I mean, certainly, of course. I mean, Bill, to me, is a big part of the sound, but I got to say, the current lineup of Black Sabbath, they sounded great, and Tommy's a great drummer, and, I've never seen him play before, but he helped the band sound great, So, but yeah, I mean, Bill's style, even as I'm going back listening to some old recordings, it's the production of those recordings, as raw and kind of unrefined as they were, there was just a lot of really great creative moments that happened. The drumming, like even Children of the Grave, for instance, these drum overdubs that were going on with the tom-tom overdubs and things is just really, really inventive, really cool sounding stuff for back in that day.
Now, since we're talking about drummers, Dave had an opinion that if you had Sean Drover on drum duties 30 years ago, Megadeth wouldn't have needed to hunt for a drummer at specific intervals in the band's history. What exactly is it that Sean brings to the creative canvas of Megadeth?
Sean is really, it's always kind of said, me and Dave are kind of the yin and yang, and Sean is he's sort of a similar personality to me as far as he's a really stable guy, and it really, I think, it's great to be in a band with Sean, just because of a real stability he brings to that some of the best drummers are the ones that you don't notice because they're just throwing it down so solid and so just dead on the money And then it's one thing when a lead guitar player or a lead singer is explosive and dynamic. You expect that's kind of what you want in a rock band. But
Right.
when your drummer's a loose cannon, that usually comes through in his playing too.
Right.
It means his meter's usually not good, the tempos aren't good, and as creative as they are, the main one of the key roles of a drummer is to be solid and to really be able to lay it down, and that's what Sean brings, as well as he really understands. He's a huge fan of metal. He's really understands the Megadeth legacy, and Sean is kind of our heavy metal barometer. If we're questioning if something is metal enough, we usually run it by Sean.
Well, let's talk about Super Collider. Now, it's an album that contains all the musical styles and variety that
Yeah.
defines Megadeth. Do you see the album that way?
I totally do. And I know that a lot of it got some flack when the single first came out, because traditionally we would lead with a metal track going to radio, which in my opinion would have been probably Kingmaker. And then
That's
so
great.
the first thing you hear, new Megadeth record, you hear Kingmaker, you're like, oh yeah, totally friggin' metal
Kick-ass
track,
metal.
totally a Megadeth fan. And then you would come with the more mainstream song, Super Collider. Well, this time it was the opposite, and it does kind of prejudice people. I mean, your first thing you hear is kind of what you identify the record as. So, and I think Super Collider is a great tune. I think it's a really cool song. Sometimes it isn't what you release; it's when and how you release it.
Right, absolutely.
And I think so. But again, now that the fans have listened to it and have lived with it for a while, I mean, a lot of our longtime fans, come up to us in meet and greets and stuff, and they're like, "Man, the record is just great." And even a lot of fans that have been with us from the beginning are they're going, you know what, this is one of the best Megadeth records ever. You've got
That's awesome.
Dance in the Rain, Burn, Kingmaker, Built for Warrior, all these heavy tracks, but then you've also got these more melodic things. And you're right, there's a Megadeth record isn't a one-trick pony. There's a lot of stuff from over the years that we've written, and I think this new record reflects back all of those sounds, all of those different eras of a,
It's a musical journey right from the first album
yeah.
till your latest release. Basically, the amalgamation of everything.
It's a 30-year journey,
Absolutely
and,
right.
and I think the 30 years is going to come out in a new record too.
Wonderful. Well, let's talk about Metal Masters Clinic 5. What are the plans for it?
That's something that just started. It's funny. It kind of started with me and Frank Bello doing bass clinics together for Harkey, and then it turned into me and Frank, Charlie Benante, and Mike Portnoy, two drummers, two bass players.
Right.
And then it turned into let's add some guitar players and some singers, and now it's really turned into this whole event. So yeah, Metal Masters 5. The next one will be at NAMM
Great.
Anaheim in January, and. Yeah, it just kind of seems to be growing, and it's kind of sort of the good neighbor thing we do in the metal community.
Wow, that's awesome, man.
Thank you.
Well, 14th of October last year marked your first visit to India.
Yeah.
What was the experience like in terms of both the positives as well as the negatives?
Well, the positives, it just confirmed one more time that metal is metal, and metal fans are metal fans no matter where you go, no matter
True.
what the culture, the religion, the politics, any of that stuff, metal, it supersedes all of it, and it's a thing
Absolutely.
that connects all of us together as metalheads. So that was great to see. Certainly, lifestyle-wise, I mean, for me, I came from the United States, and I went to Shanghai. I was in China for a trade show, the Pro Light and Sound trade show, and then I flew to India.
Okay.
And so obviously, and then after that we went to Dubai. So I got to see America, China, India, and Dubai on that trip in 2 weeks. I got to see four very radically different cultures.
Cultures, right.
Yeah, which was really, sometimes you don't appreciate a culture until you set it directly against another one.
Absolutely right.
And to see China, how that sits to America, because there's always so much, banter about China and their growth in the world these days. And then of course, and same with India. We a lot of people from India are here in the United States. They're educated here. India is India's become a good neighbor to
Of the United States.
the United States. Heck, my Jackson basses, my signature Jackson basses, the import models are made in India. So.
Wow.
And I always heard over the years talking to Jackson Guitars about Indian rosewood and how they go to India to buy the rosewood for their instruments. So to me, there was a fascination about the culture for sure. I like yoga.
Wow. So you yoga every day, I guess.
Not every day, but a couple times a week usually I do it.
So American version of yoga, maybe?
Through my eyes, it's the Americanized version of India. So it was
That's what I
cool
was
to
saying.
actually go to India and stand
Great.
on your soil and eat your food and really breathe your culture for a few days. It was
Amazing.
really cool. I really enjoyed it, and I wish I had more time to do some more sightseeing, but hopefully in the next visit I will.
Right. Well, the moment you land to the airport, your camera was on and it was rolling everywhere. You were capturing different moments of India, right?
I was, and India is a very radically different culture than a lot of Western cultures. So the
Definitely.
thing I like about having that camera with me is, first of all, it's like taking the fans on tour with us.
That's great.
It's so to me, it's my way to give back to the fans and say, wow, check this out. Look at where we are today, and you can be here with us. So it's a way to include rather than exclude.
Right.
And certainly for India, it was like, you're not going to this traffic. You guys should, I've been to a lot of big cities, and most big cities around the world have kind of nightmare traffic, but you guys take it to a whole nother level, man. It's like being on a
Well,
racetrack.
that's India for you.
Yeah, it was definitely exhilarating for sure.
Well, what about Indian food? I'm sure you must have tasted, different varieties out here, isn't it?
Well, again, we're only there for a couple of days, so all the food I ate was at the hotel. I hate to tell you, but it was a hotel version of Indian food. But it was great. It was cool, and certainly we eat Indian food as we travel around the world, and they're usually authentic places owned by people from India.
Right.
So it wasn't radically different, but there was definitely some spices and some flavors that I had never tasted before. And food, to me, food is like music. It's one of those things that
Absolutely.
crosses the cultural boundaries. Breaking bread, of course, has been an age-old tradition, of being
Right.
able to share, fellowship together. So to me, food and music and coffee and my video camera, they all kind of work together as part of my life story.
Wow, that's amazing. Well, David, thank you so much for your time. It was an honor to have a chat with you.
Thank you.
Any message for your Indian fans? The space is all yours.
Can't wait to get back. Really looking forward to our next visit.